The crowd pressed forward like an impatient tide, spilling through the glass doors of the station. Announcements echoed overhead, tinny and distant, yet sharp enough to sting. She stood still in the middle of the current, her small suitcase clutched tight, its worn leather handle digging into her palm. Her other hand rested on the frayed red scarf around her neck, the only thing steady when her breath wasn't. The scarf fluttered slightly in the draft that swept through the corridor. She pressed her lips together, eyes narrowing, not at the crowd, not at the clock blinking in cold neon, but at her own reflection in the tall window beside the ticket counter. For a moment, she almost didn't recognize herself. The girl staring back was tired, but her eyes carried something else, something she had been forced to learn. A group of men laughed near the vending machine, their voices slicing through the air. She heard her name in their laughter. Not the way family would call it, not the way a friend would whisper it with care. No, it was the kind of laughter that clung to her back in meeting rooms, in break rooms, in hushed phone calls she was never meant to overhear. She tightened her grip on the suitcase. The cracked watch on her wrist ticked faintly, a reminder that time had already stolen enough from her. Every tick felt heavier tonight, as though it knew something she didn't. She tugged her sleeve over it, hiding the fracture from view, but its weight stayed. Her eyes darted upward at the departure board. Names of places glowing in yellow letters. Names that offered escape but not refuge. She wasn't here to run. Not anymore. A little girl tugged at her mother's coat just a few feet away, pointing at the bright balloon she wanted. For a second, the sound of her soft voice cracked something in the silence she carried. She turned her head, as if the sweetness of it burned. The scarf shifted again against her throat. She closed her eyes. They had used her name like a weapon, each time sharper, until the syllables no longer felt like hers. They made her invisible in plain sight, stripping her down with every smirk. But invisibility had given her something too. It had given her room to listen, to learn, to plan. The whistle of the arriving train cut through the air, piercing and final. She stepped closer to the yellow line, her suitcase brushing her knee, her pulse matching the rhythm of iron wheels approaching. Her lips parted just enough to release a breath. Let them laugh. Let them think I'm gone. The red scarf fluttered once more, like a flame daring the wind. And she waited. The train screeched to a halt, doors yawning open, spilling passengers onto the platform in a restless blur. She didn't move. The small suitcase leaned against her leg, its weight suddenly heavier, as though every memory stitched itself into the seams. Her fingers slid along the red scarf, tugging it close. Her father had given it to her when she was 17. She could still hear his voice, low and tired, whispering as he tied it gently around her neck. You'll need something that reminds you who you are, when others try to strip it away. Back then, she had laughed at the old-fashioned sentiment. Tonight, the scarf burned with the truth of it. She blinked, and the station melted into a memory. A kitchen table chipped at the edges. Her father's cracked watch ticking faintly as he explained bills spread out like an unsolvable puzzle. She had been too young to understand numbers, but she remembered his hands, calloused, trembling. One day you'll know that survival is an art. And you'll be better at it than me. The suitcase pressed into her shin, pulling her back into the present. The leather smelled faintly of dust, and beneath its lining was more than clothes. She had packed ledgers, scribbled notes, pieces of proof, seeds of a plan that had taken shape in silence while the world thought she was shrinking. On the opposite side of the platform, families collided in warm embraces. A little boy hurled himself into his father's arms, his laughter carrying above the noise. She felt the sting of watching without belonging. Her lips twitched as if to smile, but no one waited for her on the other side of any train. Loneliness didn't scream anymore. It hummed quietly, like background static she had learned to live with. She stepped toward the train, dragging the suitcase. That was when she felt it, the weight of someone's eyes. She turned slightly. A man stood near the column, his hands tucked into the deep folds of his coat. He wasn't staring openly, but his gaze lingered longer than most strangers allow. When her eyes met his, he didn't look away. He simply tilted his head, A gesture so subtle it could have been nothing, yet she felt it in her chest like a small knock. Her pulse quickened. Was he just another traveler, or someone who knew her name in the wrong way? The scarf slipped loose, sliding against her collarbone. She reached for it, fingers fumbling, as the train doors beeped their impatient warning. Around her, passengers shoved past, their voices blurring into one rushing stream. Her hand froze midway, gripping the scarf. Should she step on or stay? The man by the column hadn't moved. Still there. Still silent. And for the first time all night, she hesitated. The train doors closed with a metallic slam, sealing away the last of the hurried passengers. She stood still on the platform, her suitcase anchored by her side. The man by the column had not moved, but the way his weight shifted onto one worn shoe told her he had been waiting, not for the train but for something else. His shoes caught her attention first. Scuffed leather, cracked at the edges, soles thin from years of carrying more than his body alone. Travelers wore wear, but his was different, like endurance carved into silence. Her chest tightened. She dragged her eyes upward, refusing to linger, yet catching the corner of a wallet peeking from his coat. The leather was just as tired as his shoes, but a glimpse of something inside. A folded photograph flashed under the dim light. For a second she caught the outline of a child's face, a girl no older than 10. His thumb tapped against the wallet absent-mindedly, as though keeping rhythm with a memory he could never put down. Her breath faltered. She saw herself mirrored, loneliness tucked away, endurance disguised as ordinary. Maybe he too carried names in his past, names that hurt. A sudden shift in the air. Rain began to drum against the high glass ceiling of the station, soft at first, then heavier, echoing the storm inside her. Thunder rolled faintly, distant but inevitable. She gripped the handle of her suitcase, debating. Leave now. Don't look back. You've come too far to hesitate. Yet something in him kept tugging at her, the same way silence sometimes carried more weight than words. He finally moved, slowly stepping closer. Not enough to close the distance, but enough to fracture her resolve. His gaze was steady, not prying, not sharp, but not gentle either. Your train, he said quietly, voice low as if testing the air. Her fingers tightened around the scarf. The red fabric slipped between her knuckles, threading doubt into determination. Why did it feel like he knew? Not just about her train but about everything she carried inside that suitcase, inside her name? The rain slammed harder, shadows trembling on the tiled floor. She felt the conflict claw at her. One path promised escape, the other dragged her into the unknown. Her lips parted but no words came. He adjusted his coat, the photograph flashing again before disappearing. She couldn't unsee it. A child. A loss. A mirror. The announcement board flickered with the next departure. Her heart pounded. Was this fate drawing her into something larger? Or was she stepping into someone else's trap? She couldn't tell. And she didn't move. The storm outside rattled against the station windows, a restless drumming that seeped into her veins. She clutched the suitcase tighter and turned sharply, ready to leave. Her legs moved fast, the scarf trailing like a flame behind her. If she could just reach the exit, the weight of his gaze would dissolve into the blur of strangers. But halfway to the doors her breath caught. Something in her chest clenched, an ache so sharp it forced her still. She turned just once against her own will. And there he was. The man had stepped forward, closer than before, though he still left space between them. His hand lifted. The red scarf dangled loosely from his fingers. She hadn't even realized it had slipped from her neck in her rush. For a moment she couldn't breathe. He didn't speak. He simply held it out, the fabric trembling slightly in the draft of the station. The scarf, her father's words stitched into every thread, now dangled between them like a fragile lifeline. Her hand rose instinctively, but she stopped midway, frozen in the invisible line that separated strangers from something else. Behind them voices carried. A woman whispered too loudly to her companion, eyes darting toward them. Some people carry more than just bags, they carry silence. The words weren't meant for her, yet they landed heavy, like judgment she had always lived beneath. A group of businessmen brushed past, one glancing at her suitcase, then at the man's worn shoes. Their smirk said more than their silence, the world always finding ways to measure, to assume, to mock. Her skin burned beneath it. Her lips parted. Why? It was barely a word, half swallowed by the echoing station. He didn't answer. Instead, his gaze flickered, first to her suitcase, then back to her eyes. Something unspoken lived there, raw and unfinished. She stepped closer, fingers trembling as they closed around the scarf. Their hands brushed, just barely. Yet the touch jolted her more than thunder splitting the sky. Her knees nearly gave. She wanted to walk away, to break free before this moment swallowed her whole. But her body betrayed her, holding her in place, eyes locked with his. The scarf coiled in her palm, no longer just a reminder of her father's promise, but now a thread binding her to this silence, this stranger, this storm. A child's laughter rang out somewhere down the platform, innocent and fleeting, reminding her of the photograph tucked in his coat. The sound struck like glass against bone. Her throat tightened. She could leave. She should leave. Instead, she stood there, shaking, caught between the weight of her past and the question in his eyes. And the rain kept falling. The scarf still trembled in her hand when his voice finally broke the silence. "You dropped this," he said, but his tone carried more than the simple words. It was careful, deliberate, as though he knew exactly what it meant. Her chest tightened. She wanted to ask how he could know, but the question tangled with the storm inside her. Instead, her eyes slid again to the wallet half hidden in his coat. This time the photograph wasn't just a glimpse. The corner had slipped further out, revealing the child's smile. Same scarf, smaller, tied around her neck like a bright ribbon. Her breath caught. It wasn't just her father's gift. It had belonged to someone else too. Someone he had lost. And the weight of it changed everything. She staggered back a step, suitcase wheels screeching against the floor. Memories collided. Her father's cracked watch ticking through nights of unpaid bills. The laughter of men using her name at work. The way invisibility had been her only shield. And now this stranger, holding proof that their silences were cut from the same cloth. Thunder cracked, rattling the glass above. He spoke again, softer this time. "Some people carry more than just bags, they carry silence." Her knees nearly buckled. The words, ones she had overheard from strangers moments ago, now echoed back to her, reshaped by his voice. A time loop echo binding her past and present in a way she hadn't chosen, but couldn't escape. And then came the twist that sliced through her resolve. His coat shifted as he adjusted his stance, and a small emblem flashed. A logo she recognized instantly. Cold recognition crawled up her spine. It wasn't just any mark. It was the crest of the very company she had fought to rise against. The company where they used her name to laugh, to diminish, to erase. Her stomach dropped. He wasn't just a traveler. He wasn't just a father. He was the owner. The man who stood above the very empire she had sworn to dismantle. Her hand tightened around the scarf until her knuckles blanched. For a heartbeat she thought of running, of disappearing again like she had before. But the photograph in his coat, the echo of his words, the storm inside her, all pressed into one truth. She was past the point of return. She lifted her suitcase, spine straightening with a resolve she hadn't realized was ready. Without another word, she turned and walked, not toward the exit, but toward the stairwell leading up to the glass-lined offices above the platform. Every step felt heavier. Every step felt like a choice. And she didn't stop until the door swallowed her whole. The rain had softened to a steady whisper by the time she reached the glass-walled office above the platform. The station below glowed with flickering light, a mirror of the storm she carried inside. Her suitcase leaned against the wall, her hand still clinging to the red scarf as if it were the only thing tethering her to this moment. He entered quietly. No footsteps, no warning. Just the soft shift of air when the door closed behind him. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Not harsh but steady, like a man used to being obeyed. She turned to face him, chest heaving though her voice stayed steady. "And yet I am." Their eyes locked, hers raw with defiance, his shadowed with something harder to name. For a long moment silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the rain against the glass. He moved closer, pulling the wallet from his coat. He opened it slowly, laying the photograph on the desk between them. The child's face smiled up at her, bright, innocent, forever locked in memory. And around the child's small neck the scarf. Her throat tightened. This, he said softly, nodding to the scarf in her hand, was hers. The last thing she wore. The world tilted. The scarf, her father's words, her anchor all these years. It wasn't just her inheritance. It was a thread connecting her to his grief. She wanted to let it fall, to release it from her trembling grip. But her fingers refused. You remind me of her, he continued, his voice breaking for the first time. Not because of how you look. Because of how you fight the world even when it laughs at you. The words struck like a blade wrapped in mercy. For a heartbeat, she saw the man not as the owner of the company that had crushed her, but as a father hollowed by loss. And yet, the truth of who he was, what he stood for, burned all the same. Her gaze dropped to the cracked watch on her wrist. Her father's watch, his ticking reminder that time was survival. The scarf and the watch, two inheritances, two burdens. One of grief, one of endurance. She inhaled sharply. You don't get to choose me because I remind you of someone you lost. He blinked. Silence. She set the scarf down on the desk beside the photograph. Not thrown, not given, placed. Her hand lingered for just a moment before pulling back. This doesn't belong to me anymore, she whispered. For the first time in years she felt light. Empty, yes, but light. He reached for the scarf but stopped midway, fingers trembling. Neither of them touched it again. Her suitcase handle clicked as she lifted it, the sound final. At the doorway she paused, looking out at the platform where the night had begun. The crowd still surged below, but now she wasn't invisible. She wasn't hiding. Not anymore. Her voice was barely a breath, but it carried. Not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever. And with that she walked into the storm. The city had rinsed itself clean by dawn. Streets shimmered with last traces of rain. And the air carried that fragile stillness that comes after a storm, when everything feels fragile but new. She walked slowly, suitcase rolling behind her, the cracked watch ticking faintly against her wrist. Every sound seemed sharper now, the sweep of tires on wet pavement, the faint chatter of shopkeepers unlocking their doors, the hum of life returning to its rhythm. She wasn't rushing anymore. The red scarf no longer clung to her neck. It lay folded neatly in the bottom of her suitcase, tucked between clothes like a pressed memory. For the first time she did not need it around her throat to remember who she was. When she reached her apartment, the space greeted her in silence. She set the suitcase by the wall and, almost without thinking, pulled the scarf out once more. Her fingers smoothed the fabric, tracing its threads as though they were veins of two lives intertwined. She placed it gently inside a drawer, letting light fall across it through the thin curtains. Her father's voice whispered back, as if carried by that light. You'll need something that reminds you who you are. She smiled faintly. Maybe she didn't need the object anymore. Maybe memory itself was enough. The cracked watch ticked against her skin, steady as always. But now, instead of dragging her forward like a weight, it felt like a quiet companion. Time hadn't stolen everything. It had given her moments, messy and perfect, yet undeniably hers. She sat by the window watching the street below. A young girl in a school uniform rushed past, holding her mother's hand. Their laughter rose bright against the morning air. For a moment she pressed her palm against the glass, not out of longing but out of recognition. Her mind circled back to the man at the station, to the photograph, to the silence that had stretched like a bridge between them. She didn't know if she would ever see him again. Perhaps she didn't need to. Sometimes love is not romance, she whispered to herself, voice trembling but steady. It's recognition. The words sank into the quiet room, lingering like dust caught in a beam of light. She leaned back, letting the day unfold outside her window. She had lost, she had carried, she had let go. And somehow that letting go had given her more than winning ever could. Her suitcase sat by the wall, still half-packed. Not ready to leave. Not ready to stay. Because sometimes survival wasn't about where you went next. It was about finally knowing you could choose.